If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings, but you're pro-choice, abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Because honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no. The forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa.
And it is that time once again. Going to do a little wide right turn with Tom Kelly. Got lots to cover, and we're a couple of pretty busy guys. I happen to be back in Casper getting ready to go to a labor committee meeting tomorrow, so I ain't got a whole lot of time to play around. We're going to jump right into it. Tom Kelly, what's going on with you today, bud?
What's going on with the entire world? We're going to talk recalibration. I was there. You were there. We saw what happened. There's some stuff to unpack about those first couple days of meetings, but everyone's talking about the missile strikes on Iran right now. And what I'm seeing right now in the American public is just a tragic divide in public opinion, how people see each other. I didn't think we could become more tribalistic until something like this happened. And it's so difficult right now to have a rational discourse on what happens next. How effective was this? Was there another way to go? What's going to happen going forward? How will allies like China and Russia fit into this now? Is China going to go after Taiwan while we're sending our limited munitions into Iran? Why is something that was first called for in 1980 finally coming to fruition after all these years? And the last thing I want to do with anybody is start arguing with them their interpretation of the Bible, of whether or not we're supposed to bomb nuclear facilities in Iran, what the Bible has to say about that. I'd like to have more practical conversations on it. And I think I feel some people getting frustrated with me that I'm not taking a really, really hardcore stance on this either way. I've been very clear from the beginning. I don't want to get into another endless war in the Middle East. It's nonstop war there. It always has been. It's not like, boom, we dropped some bombs. That's it. Iran will never mess with us again. Of course, that's not what's going to happen. So we'll have to see what happens with that. See what you think about it right now. But I'm not nearly as excited about it as some people are. Some people think it's World War III and it's the end of the world. No, it's not. The Middle East is always at war. Iran's not that powerful of a country. China is having economic problems and Russia's got their hands full. They can't even take on Ukraine. We don't have to worry about them. It's not World War III. But other people who think that we've just shown our global dominance and all these other countries are going to fall in line now because we dropped some bombs, news for you. They're used to bombs dropping on them. I mean, it's like I've said, it's nonstop war there. So I wish people would just be a little bit more reasonable and practical in their thought on this. And also understand that we as people in Wyoming, the smallest state in the country, with the smallest congressional delegation, really don't have much say in the matter anyway. So I don't know why everyone's getting that excited about it. We're not even going to be retaliatory terrorist attacks. They're not going to be happening in Wyoming. They're going to be happening in the major cities. So that's it. That's all I have to say about that tonight.
I take a special viewpoint of this, and I've gotten in a little trouble over it before, but I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East conducting war. So there's always a part of me that has a portion of my heart that goes out to the innocent people. I'm always concerned about collateral damage, and normally these kinds of strikes happen at a certain time of night when the facility, I don't know why, has the least amount of people in it, but you're still killing janitors and whoever's working the night shift, security guard, or whatever it is that really, especially in places like Iran, they're conscripted into service. Same thing with the scientists, probably. You show a knack and an aptitude for a certain ability that the state in Iran finds beneficial. You're going to work for the government. You don't have a choice. I don't know why it wouldn't be more beneficial to blow the thing up when all the scientists were there, but apparently they had moved out of these facilities months ago. Yeah, I just think that everybody needs to calm down a little. This isn't war. These kinds of precision, discretionary, whatever strikes happen under the president's authority pretty regularly. Clinton did it. Obama did it. Bush did it. Don't want to argue about it. It's not necessarily an act of war. Yes, it could lead up to, but right now is the time to kind of just, hey, we got the 4th of July coming up, and that's the time to celebrate our independence. I guess half of the country is going to sit around and either talk about or participate in pointless protests about things that don't really exist. So go ahead and focus on doing that. And we'll just kind of have to see how the Middle East shakes out. I would hate to see us go into another ground war, especially if there aren't serious guardrails put on it. But like you said, that's not this. And I don't know. I always think about the innocent lives lost, whether they're our team, sympathetic to their team, forced into whatever. There's people that died because of this decision that had nothing to do with what we're worried about, what we're talking about, and probably didn't even support it. So a little bit of humanity there. And I think we can get through the next couple of weeks seeing how this fleshes out.
That's pretty much where I am right now. I'm cautiously waiting to see what happens next. As soon as Israel hit them the first time, I knew we were going in because I knew that Israel wouldn't have done so without getting a green light from the United States first. We pretended like we had nothing to do with it, like we didn't fund their weapons. You got Rubio out there saying, oh, we had no idea. We have nothing to do with this. That's not true at all. So I knew eventually we were going in. Basically, it looks like what happened is we told Israel, if you clear out their air defenses, we'll take out the nuclear facilities for you. That's it. And I'm hoping that's the end of it for now. But of course, Iran that won't be the end of it. But let's move on to something that the people of Wyoming actually have a lot more to say about. Maybe not at the moment. It's not the hot topic on social media and the news, but you have a lot more say in what actually happens in the policy. And that is our state's educational system. And some people might look at that and say, oh boy, taxes and education and public administration financing, big yawn. Not in Wyoming. We have got not so much a political circus going on, but not that close from being one at that point. I mean, I'm starting off with my emails. My emails are just through the roof, and they're all pretty much have the same topic. So I'm getting email bombed from one cause, and it's from the side that, of course, would like to see more and more spending on the public education system. But I've got some highlights. Got some highlights from my favorite ones here, because most of them just came in and just said, please don't cut spending. And I'll come back to that later. But my first one says, don't cave to so obviously delusional MAGA leadership. Show your true strength by doing the right thing for you constituents. Well, I guess you could say we have some MAGA leadership maybe in Wyoming, but quite technically speaking, that's a national movement. So that's really, I'm not seeing a national agenda at all in any of our meetings when we're talking about this thing. I got another one that just told me very tersely, please stop stealing money from public schools. I have now been accused of pilfering funds from public schools at this one. This one's pretty good too. Stop the assault on public education in Wyoming. The Freedom Caucus is a stain on Wyoming politics and culture. You should all be embarrassed. I have to reiterate again, I am not a member of the Freedom Caucus. That fact, it seems to be lost on some people or ignored, defied or denied or whatever, but okay. But this is the winner. This is the winner. The MAGA fascist Trump-tards, and you may be one of them, that have infested our governments at all levels are working to defund the education system. They do this to enhance the ability of charter schools to make American education a pay-to-pay, I think that was supposed to be pay-to-play, a pay-to-pay proposition, much like they have done to American politics in general. If you are the political whore that Donald Trump wants you to be, you will ignore this message and get on your business, BIS, of making the U.S. another vassal nation in Putin's pocket. If not, get off your ass and start making enough noise to be a big problem for those that are actively destroying our nation, and you know who they are. I'm just going to frame that one. I don't know what to do with that. I mean, at least it is a personally written one, though. I have to give all these people, and I'm not necessarily making fun of them as much as I'm pointing out how heated the rhetoric is getting, how much of it is off the mark about this idea about we're trying to destroy public schools, we're trying to destroy the entire country. But again, I give these men and women credit for actually writing their own words to me, because I got at least 20 emails that said, Dear Representative Kelly, delete this text and insert your message here. And then they sign their name.
Yeah, I love that.
If you're going to send a form email, please just take the time at least to insult me. I mean, it was cute when I got the first few of them, and I don't want to dismiss the public at all. The overwhelming majority of them, I've gotten hundreds of emails, were not lazily sent form letters. They weren't insulting. They weren't combative like that. Most of them were heartfelt, informative, from parents, from teachers, community members, talking about their experiences and which part of the state they were in, and they were worth my time reading. That is not what we saw when you get the public statements in the recalibration meeting, as you saw, Joey. That's not so much the rational type of arguments we're getting on what to do with the public school system. What we're seeing there, I think, was best illustrated by a Wildfile article that I saw that I believe you were quoted, and even at the end, it said, a Facebook conversation about those tax reductions helped motivate the Better Wyoming crowd to show up in Casper. In that post, former state lawmaker Scott Clem asked how the legislature plans to, quote, cut education by 50 to 80 million annually to pay for the 25% permanent tax cut exemption, especially in light of the legislature being 0-6 in the courts for not adequately funding education. And the quote in return is from Ken Pendergraft of Sheridan. It says, recalibration. And the NEA was there in force with T-shirts made up just for the occasion. And they were handing out printouts of a screenshot of that very brief Facebook interaction between a former legislator and a legislator who's not on the recalibration committee, nor is he on the education committee. That is the basis of the narrative that we saw the entire time. And it goes on further in that story. The executive director, Nate Martin of Better Wyoming, says our public school system is a major driver of the state's economy. And there's a growing perception that some of the people who are tasked with upholding and supporting a complete and uniform system of public instruction per the Constitution are instead working to undermine it. Well, I have two things to say about that quote. Number one, from where is that perception coming that we're working to undermine it? From that one Facebook post from somebody who's not on recalibration? From the fact that Wyoming voters were at the Capitol in a figurative sense with their torches and pitchforks demanding property tax reductions? I mean, the hell we caught for only a 25% exemption? We've completely forgotten here how many people in the state wanted the full 50% exemption and are going to be back next year voting on that. And we were hoping that we could find a middle ground there where we could provide some significant tax relief and not completely starve the counties and the schools at that point. So to cut it in this light that we're trying to defund public schools, if that's what we wanted to do, we would have gone the whole 9 yards with a 50% tax exemption right there. That was the goal. We could have done that, but we didn't. So that's the first idea. From where they're getting the perception, it's coming from places like Better Wyoming, that anything that increases educational choice is somehow an attack on the government school system. The other one is our public school system is a major driver of the state's economy. No, false, 100% wrong. And I will get heat for this, but I'm speaking economically. I'm not talking about in a sentimental sense. I'm not talking about in the educational value in a republic. I'm talking pure economics here. It is a drain on the economy because something that drives the economy is self-sustaining. If it was a driver of the economy, it would produce more revenue than it's spent. It would be producing jobs through its own actions. It would be creating capital, not requiring infusions of millions upon millions of dollars every year to keep it afloat. That is not driving the economy. That is a weight on the economy. Now, somebody will take this out of context and says, Kelly wants to shut down the public school system because it's a weight on the economy. Absolutely not. This is a purpose of government. It's in the Wyoming Constitution that one of the purposes of the state government will be to provide this system of public education. And it comes at an expense. But let's not paint this false narrative that this is somehow the great driver of the economy because so many people work in that field. It's still eating up money. That's ultimately what it does. But the money is being spent, or some will say, and maybe I'll give an inch on this, invested in the future by having people who can read and write and function in society. That's the purpose of a public education system. I get that. But don't tell me that if there's less money spent on the public education system, that our economy will be worse off. That's just not how things work. And I know you'd love to jump in on some things right here, so I'll let you and maybe even let you present your own quote that was in WyoFile before I go into some other things about numbers and the economy and spending and the narratives I heard this past week.
Well, it was such a shame for them to actually quote me and then do what I'm used to them doing and only put in half the quote or the statement. You know, it seemed to be the portion of a quote that I made or statement that I made that fed the rest of the story they were trying to tell. And the part that made it into the story was Rural Wyoming Matters Executive Director Joey Correnti when talking about, and they mistakenly said the budget was when I said recalibration isn't about taking a chainsaw to educational spending. Now, I said those words, but that wasn't the context. It wasn't me worried that you were going to do this as a committee through recalibration. The entirety of the points that I made were based on the arguments or the testimony that was heard prior that continually and repeatedly pointed out Article 7, Section 1 of our state constitution, reminding the committee of your constitutional duty and your sworn oath to maintain a complete and uniform system of public instruction. And that was the only reference to the Constitution that I heard from almost any other speaker. So, of course, I was inspired to go up and talk about the other portions of the Constitution that deal with school spending, recalibration, basket of goods. And in Article 7, Section 8, talking about distribution of school funds, specifically says that the legislature shall provide by general law for the equitable allocation of such income among all school districts in the state. So not just the big ones, not just what WEA wants, not specific programs, all schools, all districts in the state. And in Section 9, it demands that the legislature fund and create and maintain a thorough and efficient system of public schools. So when I went up to testify, what I wanted to do was kind of throw some cool water on the mandate that apparently the crowd and maybe even the court, I wouldn't say misinterpreted, but only focused on one section of the Constitution and the duties of the legislature. Now, I would love to see efficient defined by the committee and say when we attempted to follow the Constitution and come up with an efficient model, this is what we defined it as, and then let the legislature argue it out. But, that was just one quote and one story. I don't know why they threw me in there. What I really want to focus on is what is recalibration? And recalibration is laid out in statute, Title 21, 13-909, under the determination of amount to be included in foundation program for each district. Subparagraph T is the mention of recalibration that says not less than once every 5 years, the legislature shall provide for the recalibration of the education resource block grant model to determine if modifications are necessary to ensure that it remains a cost-based system in light of changing conditions and modifications to law. So I think a lot of the public, a lot of the media, and definitely a lot of the people that were there with their matching T-shirts on, and maybe even Ken Pendergraft, have the wrong idea of what recalibration is. This is not school funding. This is the funding model that the state agrees on that the school districts use when they put together their budget requests, which we will see next year, and say, hey, based on this, we need a janitor. A janitor costs 2 students worth of full contact time. ADM is, I believe, what they call it. And we need this much money to have all these things. And they're all in the basket of goods. So you're not appropriating money. You're not spending money. You're not reducing money. You're looking at the block grant model. So there's really very few things that the recalibration committee can do, especially when it's by law balanced on ensuring that the block grant model remains a cost-based system. So Ken Pendergraft, in his statement, I could maybe stretch my mind to understand where he's coming from, but he's actually in the best position to just man up and say, no, I'm going to move to cut spending because he's on the committee that would do that. He's on Appropriations Committee, and he's the one that will be sitting there with a few other people dealing directly with the budget. Now, the budget, of course, is supposedly coming from this cost-based block grant model, but there's a difference between the budget proposal based on the model, the actual budget, the appropriation, and then once that appropriation is done by the legislature, it goes as a block grant to each of the school districts. There's no oversight on spending because of the model. So a lot of people have a lot of confusion as to what's actually going on. How does this Rube Goldberg machine work? And again, because it was brought up at the meeting and printed out and distributed to everybody, I think Ken Pendergraft might be confused or setting the recalibration committee up for taking the blame for something that really only his committee can do. Education committee can't do it. The recalibration committee can't do it. The appropriations committee, who works the budget, can do exactly what Ken Pendergraft mentioned, cut $50 to $80 million out of the school budget, but only with a majority of support from both chambers of the legislature. So I think we just really need to get down to what is the recalibration committee? What are you guys actually doing? And is it basket of goods? Is it discussing whether we're even going to continue? I don't even read anything in here that says you can have a discussion or take action on whether you should be doing block grants or not. Specifically, the law says you're there to talk about the funding model and ensure that it remains cost-based. So I think a lot of people are getting hot under the collar and pointing fingers and slings and arrows over something they don't understand what's actually happening here.
And that's where we get the narrative from of trying to undermine public schools. And this all comes from like the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association. The WEA is just an affiliate of the NEA. They take their marching orders from that Washington group, whether they pretend to or not. And they are in trouble across the entire country. And I'll get to this later and give you some examples why, because the public education system is failing across the country. And they're trying to double down and say, no, it's wonderful, it's great. We just need to spend more money on it, even though that's not how it works out in states that are spending endlessly more and more money. And where you see that evidence is especially in universal school choice. The idea now that the education of the public, providing for public education, does not have to mean only government-owned providers of education. I've told people this before. We make sure that everyone can eat in America, but we don't have government-owned restaurants and government-owned grocery stores only. We make sure people can go and use a hospital with Medicaid, but we don't only have government-run hospitals. Believe it or not, people can use Medicaid at Catholic hospitals, at Lutheran hospitals. So the idea that you can't have any public money go for a public good, end up in a private service provider, it's a non-starter. We have private service providers build our roads. We have private construction companies do that, and people aren't screaming, we can't have that public money go to private construction. Well, that's ultimately who provides the service. The public is providing the funds for the public roads. We've got a private service provider. That is not crazy. And not only do most states do this, we talked about this on your show in the past, most countries in Europe do this. To provide universal public education is a mix of public and private schools. And they have a little bit of competition. And the students obviously in Europe are getting a better education than we are in the United States right now. But the narrative put forth I saw over and over was that the Freedom Caucus is attempting to dismantle Wyoming's public education system. And we're doing it by, first of all, cutting taxes to starve the public schools. And then any money that's left, we're giving away to private schools. And I could see on the surface how somebody who is ideologically driven and maybe a little bit deficient in facts would buy into that, especially when you hear some of the rhetoric from some people on the right about some of what we call libs of TikTok teachers, the ones who are more concerned about waving pride flags and kids learning how to read. And unfortunately, I see this on the right. People think that's the norm, not the exception in the public schools. They don't realize how fantastic professionals we actually have in our public schools. They focus on that small minority, and you do have ideological driven people who would love to see the public school system be used to push neo-Marxist ideas. I know that because I had a teacher certification. I have a master's degree in education. I took the classes in graduate school. I heard the professors preaching social revolution through public education. It's real. But most people who go and teach reading, writing, and math are actually trying to teach reading, writing, and math. And they're not quite pushing the left-wing agenda that some people on the right wing claim that they are. Now, the other side of that, the hyperbole and the distorted reality, is that everybody who would like to see more educational choice, everybody who has concerns about certain ideologies being taught in the public classroom while kids are failing to learn how to read, write, and do math, want to shut down the entire public school system. The fact is that the states with the most robust school choice programs still have roughly 85% of all kids in the state attend public schools at that point. So this is not an assault on public schools. The idea of choice is in addition to public schools, which is why funding for educational choice in Wyoming is a separate fund. There's not a single cent coming out of the school foundation to go to school choice. It's coming out of the general fund. If any spending cuts have to be done to sustain spending on educational savings accounts, not vouchers, please learn the difference. If any money has to be saved, it'll have to be from the general fund. If there's any cutting that has to come, it'll have to come from the general fund. And there are other places to cut that are not specifically listed in the Wyoming Constitution saying we have to fund them. So if we're going to prop up ESAs because they are vastly more popular than we thought they were going to be, there are about 4,000 spots and they've pretty much already been all eaten up despite this lawsuit that's pretending to stand up for families and children while screwing families and children by trying to shut down the choice program that 4,000 families signed up for. Thank you for showing your hand, WEA, that you care about preserving the government school system, not about the kids, not about the families. We can't underfund education. We've got the court orders on that. We are constitutionally mandated to make sure the public school system has the funds it needs. So again, let this sink in. If educational savings accounts become a bigger expense than we thought, and more people are using them than we had predicted, and we have to find more funds for them, they come from other places in the general fund, not from the school foundation fund. So it's a straw man argument that ESAs and property tax cuts are sent there to destroy the public education system. As somebody who was appointed to the recalibration committee, that's the first thing that slapped me in the face. And I talked to people about it humorously, but at the same time, a great concern that we have a significant property tax cut at the same time we've got a court saying we're not spending enough money. Oh my God, we've got a challenge here. So the last thing we were thinking of at that point, walking into the meeting, is like, oh boy, how do we cut spending? How do we cut public schools to the bone? Joey, how do we use that chainsaw you don't want us to use per WIO file? That's not where we're coming in at all. Yet, witness after witness that first day came in to publicly testify, came in and presented that narrative of please don't underfund our schools. Please don't shut down our public schools. We got stories about how wonderful public schools are, how they're great community centers. And I agree with all of that. But what's left out of those arguments are so are churches, so are private schools, so are little league teams. There are all sorts of places where you could have community and relationships and have wonderful things happen. They don't have to be government schools, but that doesn't mean I'm a fan of shutting down the public school system. I am a father whose son with Down syndrome attends the public school system, and they do a wonderful job with him. And I don't want to see that get eviscerated because we appreciate the help we get with our son on that. It makes no sense at all for me to come in here with this mindset that this public school system, which has served my family fairly well, some of my kids not so well, some of my kids wonderfully, that we would maintain a system that the majority of people of Wyoming want. Are there some hardcore libertarian types out there that nothing should be owned by the government? Everything should be private. Yes. And they make up pretty much less than 1% of the electorate. They might make a significant amount of noise on social media, but you'd be hard pressed to find double-digit percentages of people who say, yeah, I want all the public schools shut down in Wyoming at that point. Even people who don't have kids in the schools understand the importance that we've got a society that's able to read and write. So I wish we could dispense with this false narrative that we're going in there with the mission to defund public schools. Now, I can't speak for other members of the recalibration committee, and we have had some conversations, and we do speak privately sometimes, believe it or not, about things. But I only speak for myself. You could ask other members what they think if you'd like to know what they think. I came in there with a mission to make sure that the system is recalibrated so the teachers have salaries that reflect the value they bring to the table and they're competitive with other states. Wyoming spends, last I saw, we are about 10th in the nation for how much we spend per student. Only a handful of states spend more per student than we do. Now, part of that is because we've got higher transportation costs because of the setup of Wyoming. But part of that is because we fund public schools really, really well in Wyoming. Yet, our teachers are in the bottom half of pay. I think we ranked 27th last year. So we could spend sometimes 9th, 10th, or 11th in spending per student, yet our teachers are getting paid around 27th or 28th in the country. There's a mismatch there. And my understanding, looking at the history, because I had to come up to speed on recalibration, is that we used to pay our teachers really, really well in relation to other states. And that's slowly faded over the years. And it becomes difficult to get people to want to work in Wyoming when they could jump the border into Colorado and make significantly more money for doing essentially the same job, because teaching public school going from state to state isn't all that different. It's a very similar system going from state to state about how these buildings are set up, where people get their educational degrees, what the dominant theory of the day of education is at that time. Very similar going on from state to state. So I'm looking at this, and it's clear to me looking at it that the system is out of whack. The model is out of whack because starting pay is less than $40,000 per year. But in reality, it's over $50,000 per year in most school districts. And I don't think that's high enough considering inflation, cost of living in many places in Wyoming. We're going to have to come up with something that's a little different for a regional cost adjustment for Teton County, because that is a severe statistical outlier, and you'll never find anyone to teach there if we have a one-size-fits-all policy. But these are the things we're looking at right now. Now, the monkey wrench that the court has thrown in there is one judge has unilaterally tried to tell the legislature what education is. It's no longer the basket of goods, because the court decision could be, you have this basket of goods that you require all the districts to teach, and you are not funding them enough to teach that basket of goods. That's a fair argument. You're not sending enough money to hire the instructors and the support to teach that basket of goods. That's a fair argument. Oh, by the way, the basket of goods includes the mental health of every student, a brand new computer for every student, and breakfast and lunch for every single student, maybe 12 months out of the year. No, the legislature will decide what education is. We'll decide what the basket of goods is. And then the courts can rule, are we underfunding that basket of goods? And of course, the public schools are coming at this because they love the idea. More money. They're coming in and saying, well, we're already spending this money on feeding the kids anyway. Fine. That's your district's decision. That doesn't make it the state's responsibility, because a local community decided that they were going to use public funds to feed everybody, whether they needed it or not. And yes, I understand the arguments. A hungry child does not learn as well as a kid who had lunch. That's true. A kid who is mentally ill has more trouble learning than a kid who's got mental health support. That's true. It's also true that kids learn better when they get proper sleep at night. Are we going to buy sleep number beds for every kid? Or are we going to have nap time at school to make sure they're all properly rested? Are we going to start getting into their home life? Because home life is a bigger determinant. That is the biggest determinant of how well a student does in school, is how stable their home life is. The state can't overcome these barriers. So what I would like to focus on is making sure that we have the basics of education down. And the basics of education are learning how to read, to write, to do math, and learning how to communicate and speak, and not speak in texting language, and not have conversations where you stare at the back of each other's phones or the front of your phone rather than making eye contact, and to learn how to apply concepts to be able to think critically, because we have no idea what's coming next with AI. We have no idea how many jobs are going to be replaced with artificial intelligence. So we cannot predict what the world is going to look like 6 months from now, let alone 6 years from now. So we need people who could actually think, not being taught what to think, but how to actually think. And that's what we're trying to come up with in the recalibration model. How do we provide the funding to a public education system that will allow school districts to do these things? And if you ask the school district, I said this in committee because we had these focus groups, the stakeholders came to meetings and they told the people working on the model what worked on the model and what didn't. And I wrapped up really quickly, and some people thought I was a little bit glib, but I think I was dead on when I said, so you asked a bunch of people within the public school system what they like about the funding model for the public school system, and they said, we like the block grant. We like to be able to spend the money any way we want, and we want more money. And that was it. That's really all they came up to. It was like, we like the block grant. Please don't tell us how to spend money. Oh, by the way, we need money for this. We need more money for that. We need more money for this. We need more money for that. And I'm like, well, that's not groundbreaking. You didn't need to do a single focus group. I could have told you they were going to say that. If you only ask people within the system, we like spending money and we want more of it. And it doesn't mean they're spending it frivolously, but we need other stakeholders to come in and talk about, we need other points of view to come in, how to improve this model at this point. I want to see the public schools do a better job. Everybody does. And I am not convinced, to the chagrin of some, especially those who are in charge of the public school fiefdom right now, and they would like to keep that defended and keep their statute-created monopoly and not allow private competition coming in against them. They don't want to see any real types of reforms. It's all doubling down on what I've already seen. And I'm not saying I've seen it in Wyoming. I've seen it in Illinois, and I've seen it in Colorado, and I've heard all these arguments before that if we just spend more money, it'll get better. Reading scores go down. Math scores go down. Every time somebody comes up there and talks about how wonderful the Wyoming government schools are, and that's what I'm going to call them, the Wyoming government schools, They compare them to the government schools of other states, which are also failing, but maybe failing worse at that point. If we were to properly fund, because this is what I hear over and over, fully fund, properly fund. What does that mean? There is no ceiling to that when it comes to a public education system. There is no ceiling to that when it comes to any government bureaucracy. I guarantee you, no matter how much money we throw at the public schools, they will not have better results and they will need more money under the current model, the way it's set up. And this is how I know this, because we see it nationwide. Let's imagine they get every cent they want right now for mental health counselors, for new computers, for all the kids, to feed everybody, to reduce the class size, and increasing teacher pay and reducing class size are two of our major goals here right now. And they're more difficult to accomplish when we start branching off into other things. But let's say they get their entire Christmas list of everything they want, fully funded as they say it. We may be talking about, instead of $22,000 per student, $32,000 per student. And what will we get for that? Well, I started looking into the National Assessment of Educational Progress, because we've got blue states. These are progressive ideas that if we just feed more kids, if we just make kids feel better about themselves, if we have more social emotional learning, if we get in touch with their feelings more, if we affirm them, if we're more inclusive, education will get better. Well, this has already been happening in New York State for a long time. And I'm going to compare them to Florida. So we've got a true blue state and we've got Magaland, Florida, head to head here. And I'm going to tell you some numbers so you can see the results in these two, because New York has been pushing this way for a long time. Last year, New York spent $33,437 per student. Florida, $12,415. Now you think Florida would be a complete disaster compared to New York based on that spending per student. Now, some people might say, well, why did you pick these two states? It's not just political. It's also because they have similar demographics. They have similar population densities, because people like to say, well, there are no big cities, or they're different demographics. They're not all that different. New York is 54% white, 46% non-white. Florida, 51% white, 49% non-white. New York, 415 people per square mile. Florida, 422 people per square mile. So what we're looking at there are similar population density, similar demographics, but New York spends almost 2.5 times as much per student. And what do we come up with? 8th grade math in New York, 74% of students are not proficient in basic 8th grade math. What is that in Florida? 79%. That's worse, but it's not twice as bad. 8th grade reading in New York, 69% of students in New York now not proficient. Florida, 75% not proficient. Again, Florida a little bit worse, but not that much worse considering they only spend about $1 out of every $3 that New York does. And both states steadily falling in performance since 2013. New York has increased spending 26% in just the last 5 years. New York spends on teachers, average salary, $95,000 a year. Florida, $55,000 a year. Florida spends way less money and has similar results with similar demographics. So it's not the funding that's the issue at this point. And it's definitely not the teachers, because teachers are getting overwhelmed. There's something else going on. And just for comparison, because Wyoming's kind of its own animal in some ways. Wyoming is in the middle on spending. We're not at $33,000. We're not at $12,000. We're about $21,000 per student right now. Our demographics, we're about 84% white people in this state. And we only have 6 people per square mile. Our 8th grade math, 70% not proficient. That is 32% below basic. 1 in every 3. And this is not the Y-top. This is the national assessment. This is apples and apples. This is the same testing going around in different states. 1 in 3 of our students here can't do basic math in 8th grade. 8th grade reading, 71% not proficient. 30% below basic. And our scores have been steadily falling pretty much since 2013. Our salary is about $64,000 average. I talked about the starting salary before. And just for comparison, the national average proficiency is 27% in math and 29% in reading. So 73% not proficient in math, 71% not proficient in reading nationally, across the country, all 50 states. Doesn't matter which state you go to, how much money is spent, what the demographics are. The overwhelming majority of kids, at least 2/3 of the kids in every state, cannot do basic math and cannot do basic reading. And is very clear, spending more money is not going to fix that. Wyoming is on the same trajectory as California and Illinois and Colorado and New York. And now we have these people in there with their matching T-shirts and their Ken Pendergraph handouts, guaranteeing us if we just inflated the cost and pumped more money into the government school system, did not allow charter schools, did not allow educational savings accounts, did not allow competition and freedom of choice, Wyoming will be different. We'll be the one state where education actually improves when we inflate costs.
Well, I'm going to go back to the fact that recalibration really doesn't do all that stuff that the fearmongers are fear-mongering about. But there is consideration that has to be given to the basket of goods. Whether you guys can affect it or not, you can always make recommendations to the education committee or whoever else may handle that. But I know that one of the big concerns is on both sides, for different reasons, how big is the basket of goods, what's in it, the constituency of the basket of goods, and then specificity. Apparently right now, there's a lot of gray area in what the basket of goods means to the legislature when they say we want better teacher pay. It's not well defined. And then going on beyond that, block grants, more money, a lot of things I'm not a huge fan of. But really the question I hear being asked without being spoken by a lot of these proponents of just give us more money, the way they're asking for it, the things they're pointing out, the complaints they're making, I don't know if they realize they're complaining to the legislature and not a bleeding heart liberal judge who's just going to wave a magic wand. But what I hear them asking for is, please take away our block grant and micromanage us through legislation. Give us exactly what we want and make sure it can't be taken away and the courts will uphold it, which means you have to legislate, which means no more blank checks. So I think it's another, take a step back and look at what you're really asking for and consider the audience that you've decided to present this to. I don't know that recalibration can necessarily do that. I don't even know as a select committee whether you guys can draft your own legislation and pass it directly along to the legislature. That might have to go to the education committee, whatever your guys' work is. I do know that in statute that the block grant model is defined very specifically, 2113-101A Ruminant 14, and then really laid out in spreadsheets under Attachment A in Title 21. And it changes every time we do recalibration. So there's a lot to this, but I don't think it's hitting the fulcrum of what the people that are testifying, other than the main consultant who presented all the information, he knew what he was talking about because, well, he's the legislative educational finance consultant. By the way, another place where tax dollars are being spent in education and not going to public schools is the guy that's working all of the data for the committee. This is a very specific but very tricky process, and there's really not a whole lot of room for emotion and politics in it. That's going to happen later during the session, in appropriations with the budget, in education with some of these other things that are coming up. But recalibration, it's the funding model. And if the funding model gets a certain appropriation approved by the legislature, gets sent down to a public school or a school district through the block grant, and it's spent wrong or spent inappropriately or not spent in the way it was intended, that is now causing court cases to say, you have to keep giving us more money because of this basket of goods in your funding model, then you can't be surprised if the funding model gets changed or the block grant only applies to teacher salary. 80% of the school budget is teacher salary. So if it was only focused on that and we got that fixed, it would be a win. And I don't know where the judge is getting off saying every kid needs food and a computer. If a judge told me that, I'm like, well, that's legislating from the bench. And here's a slice of American cheese or whatever and a Commodore 64. Now you're fed, you have a computer. Let's go back to the book. Going back into the next meeting, which is going to be in September, I didn't hear any recommendations to staff coming out of this last meeting. What are we looking at? What are you guys working on? And is there another place for people to really be focusing their attention on the complaints we're hearing in the recalibration committee?
This first meeting was to let the public come out and offer what they had to offer. Like I said, a lot of it, unfortunately, was not useful because it was addressing a false narrative that we were there to destroy the public education system, and they are pleading with us not to do that. Everyone on the committee was like, yeah, we know. We weren't put on this committee to destroy it. I mean, when people are worried about the Freedom Caucus, I think literally out of the 10 of us there, I think 4 are Freedom Caucus. So the majority are non-Freedom Caucus, including 2 Democrats. We've got a balanced group there, ideologically speaking, across the legislature. We got some good information from some of the superintendents. Like Jeremy Smith came in there, and he talked about one of our biggest issues right now that follows up a lot of our funding model is the outdated part of the teacher salaries. And he and I have been on the same page with that from the beginning. And I even asked him point blank, I'm like, are you saying that would probably fix class size too? He's like, yes, it would. Maybe the 2 of us are wrong, but I appreciate not just the fact that he came in and he saw things similar to the way I did. We didn't agree on everything, but that he was offering practical logic, data, and advice from the ground. He's the business manager for Sheridan School District 1. And it's not helpful when people come in and start emotionally pontificating about how wonderful their teachers are. These anecdotes about some little girl that got some great support or something like that. I get all that stuff happens. I used to be a public school teacher. I've been there. But what you said is correct. We're working on the funding model. So we had a lot of recommendations coming from the public and ideas for us to chew on, especially from business managers and superintendents telling us what's going on in their districts, where they could use help, what we should be doing maybe with career and technical education, teacher salaries. We talked a little bit about insurance because there are options there, such as teachers can be part of the state insurance plan or a district can opt out and have their own insurance plan. We're not talking much about anything like district consolidation that's come up. The bang for the buck doesn't seem to be there. We've got bigger fish to fry than to worry about maybe, having 2 or 1 district in Sheridan instead of 3. There are administrative costs we're very much concerned about. We looked into that and we saw that over the years, the number of students has dropped steadily in Wyoming. The number of teachers has dropped. The number of paras has dropped. The number of central office staff has increased. There are more administrators now, even though there are fewer students. We'd like to see what's going on in the funding model, why that happens. That could be an artifact of the block grant. And that could be something that, here's your money. You have enough to teach. Now it's up to your school board to use it wisely enough. Every school board you talk to will tell you the same thing. Oh, we run very lean. Oh, we don't waste any money. We account for everything. Everybody in every government office says that all across the world, not just the United States. Every government bureaucracy, when challenged about how they're spending money, is going to insist they don't waste a penny. I get that. But there's obviously money being lost in administration because we are one of the most administrative heavy states in the country. And that probably explains, that correlates really well with the fact that we spend so much per student, but not so much per teacher. That is something I would like to do. So what we're looking at in the next few months, working with Larry Pikus on the data he gives us, is we're going to actually start looking at tweaking and recalibrating the model. We're not upending the model. We're not writing a new model. Everybody who's working with the model says the same thing. It's actually pretty damn good. It's just out of whack because it hasn't been properly recalibrated in 2 decades. That's what we're going to be trying to do this time, Joey. We're going to try and get this model from the year 2005 to 2025. Obviously, that's not our last meeting. Then we'll start working ideas and bills and seeing what we can come up with. But the end goal for me, and I'm hoping for other people on the committee, and even for a couple of the Democrats I talked to, is that we could right size our classrooms and our teacher salary schedule, because personally, I think the most powerful tool in any educational system is the quality of the instructor. When you have a talented, mission-driven instructor in the classroom, a human being forming relationships with children, not telling them which website to go to and which AI to work with to teach them math. When you have general relationships between dedicated professionals and kids, that's when they learn, regardless of technology, even if they're hungry. All those factors, somebody out there will say, Kelly says, let the kids go hungry. Bullshit. Not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying the number one factor is a dedicated and excellent instructor in the classroom working with kids. And the other factors are obviously factors, but they are not the primary driving factors. And we cannot have the best people in the classroom when the best people in the classroom have a choice of working in Wyoming for $55,000 or somewhere else for $75,000 to do basically the same job. They've got mouths to feed themselves. They've got rent to pay. They've got houses to buy. We need to be able to pay teachers enough so they can live in the communities with whom they work. It's that simple. So that's where I'm coming from, Joey. I would like to do what we can to tweak the model, what we can, to get the funds into the classroom, to the kids, to the teachers, to the paras, to everybody who has their hands on with the children. So the kids are actually getting a good education at this point. It is outside of recalibration's purview to dictate what's actually going to be getting taught in the classroom. We can move and direct funding more towards career and technical education, as the state is completely short on electricians and welders and plumbers and people who can work with their hands and machinists. But we can't tell teachers, we can't tell districts how to present their curriculum. That being said, I'm also on the education committee, but that's a different show.
And I'm glad you are, because we're going to have to continue to have this conversation because, well, we didn't have all of it today. We'll talk about, we barely touched on insurance, but this whole claim that insurance is going up and this has got to be part of the new funding model because, well, you now let guns in school. And I think we had the wrong conversation with the wrong people, and the people that should have been having the conversation didn't have the right conversation with their insurance carriers and calling them out. But like I said, that's another conversation we'll have for another time because we're just about out of time here. So we're going to wrap it up. Tom, thanks again for your time. Every other week looks like it's going to be pretty standard for now. Sorry, folks, we're trying to get more content out to you, but a couple of busy guys doing some big things. We'll be back in Casper for that next recalibration committee meeting in September. Go to Wild Ledge. You can go down to the bottom of the main page. It'll say standing and special and all these different types of committees. Find the recalibration committee. Start going through some of these documents. The entire slideshow that Dr. Pike has presented to the committee, telling them how he looked at the model, what they're seeing as trends, what he thinks needs to be done. That is all on there. You can also go on YouTube, maybe catch some of the highlights of the video, but it would really help if more people knew what the functions of the committee were, what the work they're doing is, and what the information they're getting to do that work looks like. Hopefully I'll see some of you up here in Casper in September. And if you do come up for the meeting and you see me and Tom, stop, say hi. And remember, we're not from the government, but we are here to help.
If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings, but you're pro-choice, abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. Trigger warnings used to be on TV for seizures, and now they're everywhere to protect millennials' feelings. He, she, his, him, hers, them, they. Screw a pronoun, cause everyone's a retard these days. I hear them preaching at the protest that hatred's the problem, but hating straight men, white folks, and Christians is common. Coca-Cola telling people they should be less white. They preach intolerance, but if you disagree, they fight. There's a race war here, elections based on fear. Black lives only matter once every 4 years. Soldiers died for this country, and every one of us benefits. Give welfare to the bums and forget about the veterans. Black folks and white folks divided by the news, but we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Cause honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no, the forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa, you can make us see it your way. No way, gasoline and propane, more flames. Oh no, no more snowflakes.
They set us up to fail, that's what they built the system for. Put an ammunition shop across the street from a liquor store. Empowering women used to be different than this before. The role models got OnlyFans or dance on a stripper pole. Screw it, I ain't tripping, I don't mean to be mean, but if our children are the future, then our future is bleak. They take an Adderall to focus, hit McDonald's to eat. They're addicted to phones and they take Xanax to sleep. They blurred the lines dividing communism and democracy. In 2021, we paint the patriots as Nazis. The men playing women's sports get trophies for winning. Like, great, let's celebrate a man for beating some women. If you're black, your life matters, you're supposed to embrace it. If you're rich or you're smart, then you're probably Asian. If you're gay, then you're brave, all of that I'm okay with. But if you're white, the stereotype is you are a racist. Blaming capitalism like that's the reason things are tough. While you tweet from an iPhone and sip on a Starbucks. You're supporting what you stand against, you don't think you are, but a Percocet addict don't donate money to pharma. Damn dog, we're all afraid to speak the truth. And the more afraid we get, the more we hate the ones who do. You're ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Cause honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no, the forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa, you can make us see it your way. No way. Gasoline and propane. More flames. Oh no. No more snowflakes.
We can all get along, but there's no stopping. Ay, everybody's wrong, that's a real problem. Ay, they don't wanna hear it, but they still talking. Ay, soon enough, we running out of options. Ay, this ain't gonna end till it's in the coffin. Ay, we ain't gonna be friends till we try to squash it. Ay, I don't know how we can make amends or we drop it. Snowflakes melt when it's hot, kid.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no. The forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa. You can make us see it your